Welcome to the fourth episode of Generation Gap Book Reviews. I'm Kristi, the mom.
And I'm Lena, the daughter.
Today we're going to be reviewing the first book in a 4-book series called the Wingfeather Saga. And the first book is On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, written by Andrew Peterson. So Lena,
Yes.
just start off with kind of a general impression of this series for you.
Like what I thought about it?
Yeah, something kind of broad to start with. Because we've both read the whole series.
Yeah.
We're not going to review the whole series in this review. We're going to just review one, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But what's your overall feeling about the whole series?
Well, I really enjoy it, which is why I've read it slash listened to it like 5 times probably now.
All the way through?
Yeah, all the way through. And it gets like it's every book gets better, I feel like.
Yeah. So this is one of those series that is a full story all the way through. None of them are standalone. You're not going to start it at book 3. You're really not going to want to read book 1 and then not continue on unless you didn't like it, of course. But if you enjoy the story, you need to keep going to finish the whole thing. So we're only going to review book 1 at this time, and that's mostly because it has been a while since I at least have read them. And I think I've read them enough or listened to them, because I actually listened to the audiobook on these is more than I've read them, that I probably could review the whole thing. But since I just started going through it again, we're gonna take it one book at a time. And now, before we get into talking about the first book specifically, we really enjoy talking about the story behind, if a book or series has a story behind how we got into it. And this one's got quite a doozy. It actually, we know who Andrew Peterson is, at least I do. Your dad and we listened to his music when we were younger. He was on the radio and such, and I always liked his sound. I hadn't really heard much from him for a while, and this he's come out with something a little more recently that I think was actually after this book series came out. Anyway, I did not know he was a writer. I had no idea he'd written this series of books, but I'm signed up on a website called NetGalley, which gives ARCs, advanced reader copies, digital ARCs for books before they come out. That's basically the way to get reviews before the book has come out. So if you ever find a book right as it's coming out and you see there's already all these reviews, that's because a lot of people were given advanced reader copies so that they can start to generate the reviews and generate buzz for a book before it even comes out. And somehow I came across the first book of this series. Probably, actually, I think there were more than one of them on NetGalley when I first found the first one, and I was surprised that it was Andrew Peterson, the musician that I knew of. And it's a kid's book. It is a fantasy series set in a whole other world, and it is technically, I think, labeled as Christian. The author is a Christian, and the series is a Christian worldview. We'll say it that way. So I read the first book, and when I read that first book, I really liked it. And I'm pretty sure, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure at least the first 2 books were up on NetGalley. So I requested the second one, and I think it wasn't too long after I read it. This was probably in 2020 then, or early 2020, that I read it the first time. And then, COVID happened and everything shuts down, and everybody's supposed to stay inside and everything. And Andrew Peterson basically started to read the book on YouTube and Facebook. And I mean, it kind of started out a little messier, but a chapter, or like 3 or 4 chapters a day in the evening. I'm pretty sure it was once a week that he was reading it. And I told Lena, I told you, if you remember this, you might want to listen to this. Now, at first, it was summer. I'm pretty sure it might not have been summer. It might have been spring. You were going outside with a friend, hanging out, just playing outside in the evenings about the time that this would happen. And you really didn't get involved in it at first. But I think it might have been partway through the first book that you actually watched one with me. I think, or maybe you went back later and watched the first one by yourself because he kept them up online for a little while. Either way, do you remember how you reacted when you first started listening to it?
Not really, not at all.
I mean, do you remember if you were hooked right away or?
Probably. I don't.
Because I do think I remember that you enjoyed it pretty quickly. You still didn't necessarily prioritize listening to it with me, watching it with me over going out and playing. Because I mean, let's be honest, it's warm outside, and you've got a friend that lives nearby, and you want to go and play outside, right? So, and because at the time, I mean, if this was 2020, you were
10.
10. But once you started listening to it and watching these more, I think you listen to the whole thing through, or did you get ahead of him? Because I think I remember some point during this you wanted to start reading it before he got to like those parts of the book or something, didn't you? Do you remember that at all?
No, not really. I remember reading it, but I didn't. I thought that was after. So
What I didn't mention yet too is when I got the ARCs for these books, for the first book or two, this was not the books came out before. And I don't remember how I don't have the book in front of me and I don't have the original copyright or anything, but I think it was around 2008. These were re-releases. They had a new cover and there were illustrations now, several illustrations throughout the book. And that was what I was actually reading the ARC for. And then when he was reading them on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, he was showing those pictures and the illustrations and stuff too. And I don't remember the order to how all this happened, but I do remember that by the time I'd read the second book, I was really into it. And your dad knew I was, and he ended up buying the first two, I think, for me, maybe for my birthday, which is in May, which would have been it would have been the correct timing. And then he pre-ordered the second two because the second two, I'm pretty sure the first two came out together and then the second two came out together. Anyway, this has been 4 years ago, almost five now, so I don't know that I'm remembering all the details correctly, but I think at some point in there, because of that, you ended up reading the books
hmm
and before he because after he Andrew Peterson finished reading the first one, he took a break, but then he did continue on, and I think he took breaks between each book, but he did eventually read the whole thing on
yeah,
online. And that was awesome too because he doesn't just read his books, he reads them with voices and really makes them come alive. And of course, I've always felt like listening to the author read their own book. It's a preference of an audiobook if I can find it anyway. Most of the time it works out really well because they know the inflections and the emotions and the emphasis and such. And so now we own at this point we own all four of the physical books and actually all four of the audiobooks. We kind of made it a point to get those on Audible recently. And actually the first two of the books were originally narrated by somebody else, but they did re-record and have eventually have Andrew Peterson narrate all four of the audiobooks online, that you can purchase. One more thing I want to mention is if you remember, we kept telling your dad how much we thought he would enjoy them.
oh yeah,
And he finally, it took him a little while, and he knew we were listening to him, and he knew all of our how we were into it and everything. And he started listening to him in the car, and I don't remember for sure which book he was in at the time. It might have been the first one, near the end of the first one maybe, that he came home from work and we were getting ready and we knew we were going to turn around and go somewhere else for a long drive, where I don't remember, but in the evening, and he asked, "Hey, do you mind when we get in the car and go again? I was just listening to the audiobook. Do you mind if we just keep going where I was at?" And that is a huge endorsement for someone who doesn't really listen to a lot of audiobooks.
he doesn't even really read.
Back then,
So
especially. He reads more now, but back then he really didn't much. All of that being said, the first book in the series, there's the family called the Igabys. There are the mom, her dad, and her three kids. The I would call main character is 12-year-old Janner. And then there's his younger brother Tink and his little sister Lily. And they live in a little cottage, but it's not exactly a peaceful world because their land has been conquered by Nag the Nameless, a not only nameless but sort of faceless evil who actually is from Dang, which is across the sea, the Dark Sea of Darkness. And he has sent his fangs to keep the people in line. Fangs are like humanoid lizard creatures. And through a series of connected events that all starts with a mischievous dog, the Igabys find themselves on the wrong side of the Fangs of Dang. And the Fangs come to realize that the Igabys have knowledge of the location to the jewels of the late King Wingfeather and the Shining Isle of Anira, which are said to be the key to restoring Anira and defeating Nag. The Igabys realize they will always be in danger. Now, more specifically about this book, I know I asked you about the series as a whole, but what are your thoughts on this book?
It's a really good book. I feel like at the beginning it's kind of slow, but then like it gets you can get more hooked later on in it.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I know what you mean. It does, like, you know, pretty much every book, you start with normal life, quote unquote.
yeah.
And even though normal life for this family is under the thumb of the fangs of Dang, it's still normal life for them. And, early on, there's definitely kind of a question of, okay, where are we going with this? What's really happening? And I think that's partly because it's a long story that's being told over 4 books.
Mm,
So it takes longer maybe to get into the the real plot than a book that only is being told in one book. A story that's being told in only one book would be.
yeah.
One of the things that stood out to me a lot about it is the quirky and just witty way that Andrew Peterson writes. My favorite example, and it's right off the bat in the book, before you even get to the Igabys, the first, I don't know what you call it, a chapter, it's more like an introduction kind of thing,
Yeah.
tells the story of how Here We Are got its name. Do you remember it?
Yeah. So basically the two first people, Dwayne and
Gladys?
Gladys, basically like they when they were made, they kind of like Dwayne got up, looked around, he was like, "Well, here we are."
Yeah, at a rock. I mean, like, he looked at a rock and
Oh
said,
yeah.
well, here we are. And
Yeah.
then that became Here We Are.
Yeah.
Uh, so there are a lot of kind of quirky names and like location names and stuff like that. There's footnotes
Mhm.
throughout the whole book that are little asides. World building often happens in footnotes. So it doesn't really necessarily take you out of the story, but it gives you a little backstory, made up, silly backstory to something that's brought up casually in the story. Another thing that I really remember when I first read it, and I mean, obviously, it's the kind of thing you can't repeat. It can't happen again because you know all of the secrets. But there was a bit of a secret revealed near the end of the first book. Kind of 2 big secrets, really,
Mhm.
and there was definitely some foreshadowing, little hints dropped here and there that I think kids that are around the age this is meant for, which is maybe 10 to 12 or so, maybe 14, would
Yeah.
maybe not pick up on as much, but if they did, they would probably really, really get excited about their theory. They would, I could see, especially older kids in the range it's meant for, starting to kind of dawn on them what's going on and getting really excited about it, which is awesome. I mean, that's a great thing when you're reading a book, and especially something that really can hook kids.
Plus some like the foreshadowing, it's the kind of foreshadowing it's like very, minor, very vague,
Subtle.
very
You're saying
subtle.
it's like subtle foreshadowing.
Yeah. And so like you really have to like I feel like you have to be familiar with like plot twists to like actually understand it some or like catch it
Which is
a bit.
probably all the more reason that the kids, like I said, kids that are around the age this is meant for may not pick up on it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to say about this book and what you liked about it, or?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say because I feel like you've said a lot of what I would be thinking, but like we have the same favorite characters, so I guess that really says a lot about them.
I think I have 2 favorite characters throughout the whole series, and they both are introduced in this first book. One of them doesn't really come into, what I really like about him until later on, but they are both here and they get a good start. I feel like Andrew Peterson is really good at creating sympathetic characters that you can really feel for and even relate to. But we won't tell you yet who they are.
Yeah, the second book.
I think we could tell them who one of them is, because the other one, I think saying that it's even our favorite, he's one of our favorite characters, maybe sort of gives you a hint of what's to come. Not much of a hint,
Yeah.
but I think the other one he's already pretty enjoyable in this first book.
Mhm.
So, his name is Oscar Enriteep,
Yeah.
and
It's a bookseller.
he's a bookseller. And what's I think's funny about the audiobook is, if you're listening to the Andrew Peterson version of the audiobooks, whenever he does a footnote, the footnote is Oscar's voice,
Yeah.
and it's really perfect because Oscar is clearly a reader. He knows. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
he lives
yeah.
his life in books. What does he do?
A lot of the time when he's talking, like he quotes different like books and stuff, like in the words of who's so and so, and then he quotes,
And I
and
mean,
then they're pretty silly quotes.
yeah, even something as simple as like, ouch. In the words
Yeah,
of so and so and so, ouch. You know, that's
yeah.
so. He's a lot of fun. The other one is more. I like he's my favorite for a different reason, but we'll probably delve into that more because we do plan to continue on and review the other books as I listen to the audiobooks again. We'll do some sort of follow up podcast where we do reviews of stuff that we've already done the first book in a series or something like that. At least that's our plan at this point. This is all pretty new. So, rating out of 5 stars.
5.
What's funny is I'm pretty sure that when I first read this book, I gave it 4.5 stars, and I feel kind of bad about that now. And I ended up changing it later at some point after I listened to it or listened to him read it, or I mean I don't even know. I think the reason for the half star detraction was because of what you mentioned earlier, the kind of slowness at the beginning. But I don't notice it as much, and it doesn't bother me as much now that I know the whole story. What about who you think you would recommend this book? Who would you recommend this book to?
Probably like mostly like kids around like 16 to 10. At... What?
Sorry, you went backwards. I always go younger. I
Sorry.
just I'm just not used to that. 16 to
uh,
10.
I don't know. I didn't think it really mattered. That's the grouping. A lot of people can really enjoy this book, honestly, if it's like your kind of thing. If you like juvenile teen books, because it's just a really interesting storyline in general.
I mean, the fact that I really enjoyed it and that your dad even really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think this series it is written for kids, but in a way, I think it's ageless. I mean, there's action, there's adventure, there's danger. One thing to keep in mind is there is some death and sad things that happen. You know, it doesn't really pull too much in the way of punches when it comes to war and fighting and such. I mean, I'm not saying it's graphic by any means, but there is some loss. There's a lot of the fighting and such comes more in later books, but this first one definitely has some pretty sad moments. But I think that this book could even be enjoyed by as young as 8 or 9 year olds. I think it has been. I think during the readings that he was doing online, I'm fairly certain he had some pretty young people involved, viewers and such. I think that listening to it with parents or even having parents read it to the kids would be great for as young as 8 or 9. But overall, I mean, this book I think could really be enjoyed by most ages. I mean, obviously not 2 year olds, but to sum up, Lena and I both highly recommend On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. The actual book copy itself is great. The pictures are really good. The audiobook narrated by Andrew Peterson is really good. You can't go wrong whichever way you choose to read it.
All right, so join us next time when we review The False Prince by Jennifer A. Nielsen.
Until next time, I'm Kristi.
And I'm Lena.
And this is
Generation Gap Book Reviews.